Welcome back to Lippincott Talk. My name is Josiah Lippincott. John Cornyn losing his primary race last night is a watershed moment in this election cycle. It shows that Donald Trump is serious about forcing the Senate to do its job, which is remarkable and good. It's a good thing that we finally can have some accountability on the right when it comes to the current leadership class in Congress. I think when looking at the political situation in the country right now, it's crucial to recognize a few things. And the first is that Congress itself is fundamentally dysfunctional. And the source of a lot of the consternation and problems in American life today can be traced directly to Congress. And the other part, of course, of all of this is the judiciary. The life-tenured judges who constantly thwart President Trump's domestic agenda are another very serious impediment to fixing some very deep and long-standing problems in our political life. But ultimately, that problem is subordinate to the Congress problem, which I think just is the center of almost every issue at the federal level can come back to Congress because of Congress's control over the budget. And the fact that you have institutional deadlock, and have had this basically since 2010, has resulted in a situation where institutions and structures that were built up by the progressives and the leftists in the middle to the late portion of the 20th century have essentially become ossified within the administrative apparatus. And so without Congress being able to take a decisive stand, if you're President Trump and you respect these institutions and you're not willing to flagrantly disregard the sort of procedures and rules that have been set up in this system, you're really at an impasse in terms of getting domestic change. And it is simply unconscionable and crazy that the Republican Party can win majorities in both houses of Congress, can win the presidency, can have a Supreme Court with the majority of justices appointed by Republicans, and you still have an inability to pass a concerted MAGA agenda or to push through policies that are consonant with the desires of the base. And so John Cornyn's loss is a good sign because it shows that there's finally a level of accountability that's occurring here, from the base and from Trump himself, putting pressure on these entrenched GOP figures in order to push them to actually get legislation through the body. The SAVE Act is the sort of pinnacle of the iceberg. And all of these problems are procedural. And it comes really down, it's amazing how dysfunctional the Senate itself is within American political life. That right there is the problem. The Senate is the problem. And what I mean by that is particularly the filibuster is the problem. The fact that the Republicans cannot bring legislation to an up or down vote on the floor of the Senate on policy proposals which are crucial to the president's agenda, which are crucial to their own promises to their own voters, is itself a mockery of our system. And for one, the filibuster isn't even part of the constitutional structure. I think there's a really good argument to be had about the validity or utility of the permanent life tenure for judges. I think there's plenty that can be said about Congress and its powers and the question of whether or not the bicameral body and state representation is functioning in any way that would actually promote law and order. I think Congress has been dysfunctional for a very long time in American life. But let's set that question aside for a moment. It is nonetheless true that the fact that legislation, major legislation of any kind, can't get through Congress without this omnibus, spending these blob pieces of legislation, that the only way to get the president's agenda through is by eating just a ton of junk, this kind of log rolling and pork barrel spending and deficit spending, is itself, it's just unstable and untenable. Republicans need to take a stand against this system. And that means the crucial task for Republicans right now is to get rid of the filibuster. Trump has pushed for this, which is good. I think it should have come sooner in his presidency. It should have come during the campaign. I think it is necessary, absolutely necessary, to force members of Congress to take up and down votes on the floor of the Senate in regards to legislation. And there's the fear that if you get rid of the filibuster, then, well, when the other side gets in power, when Democrats get in power, they'll use their majority to ram through the legislation that they want. And to which I say, that would be better than the system we have now. A system in which the majority has to take direct accountability for its own actions is better than one in which an unelected bureaucratic administrative process determines the actual functioning of our executive branch and the American federal regime. And what we have right now is a lack of accountability, where you have senators view themselves as influencers or as liaisons for different corporate or NGO interests. What we really need is to have a government accountable to the people. Accountability to elections would be better than a system in which there is no accountability at all. I would say the lesson of Obamacare is very relevant here. That is, in my view, the last really major piece of legislation that we saw in American life, right? It was an attempt to solve a real policy question. It was passed through the normal process. It wasn't some sort of omnibus spending bill. It wasn't just raising the debt limit or something. It was a real individual package for legislative approval. And Democrats, in order to get it, had to have a supermajority in the Senate. They had to have 60 seats in order to get past the filibuster and bring the bill to the floor for a vote. The reality of that situation was it crushed the Democratic Party. Obamacare was deeply unpopular. And the 2010 Tea Party backlash, and then what we've seen from Trump from 2016 onward, shows that the Democrats getting their way in Congress did not yield a generational win for Democrats. It didn't yield to them the kind of dominance and electoral dominance that is so often posited as the fear behind what would happen if we got rid of the filibuster. Getting rid of the filibuster. The Democrats, the worst thing that can happen for Democrats is for them to get what they want. If the worst thing for them is when they impose their agenda, voters don't like it. They have to moderate heavily in order to win, or they have to rely on, let us say, extremely shady circumstances in order to get them to the place where they can win decisive victories in American political life. Obama did not win in 2008 by promising to be a radical left candidate. He ran on border security. He ran on a policy of reducing our foreign involvement abroad, of shutting down Guantanamo Bay. He ran on a populist platform that in many respects looks very similar to the one that Trump ran on. You know, Obama posited himself as a post-civil rights era president, as a post-racial president, as a president who would help us overcome those divisions in a way that would yield a better, more fruitful, more unified America. Now, that's not what happened, and I think a lot of the American political situation of the last 18 years can be explained by Obama's failure to deliver on the implied promises of his campaign. So for Democrats, the worst thing that can happen for them is to get what they want. When they truly have their heart's desire, when they get in office and they impose their will, it backfires because that's not what they ran on. It isn't the kind of vision that they're offering. I think Republicans have a different problem. They run on a set of policies, they get into office, they don't implement them. So in a way, getting rid of the filibuster, making the system easier for legislation to pass through is better for Republicans than it is for Democrats. When Republicans keep their campaign promises, they win. I think you can explain a lot of Donald Trump's success in the spate of primary elections we've just seen. I think he's 38-0 in terms of his endorsements. The reason for that, I think, is because Trump has, in crucial ways, fulfilled his campaign promises. On immigration, law and order, and the economy, especially in the first two, Trump is doing really well, right? The border is secure. They are removing illegal immigrants as we speak. There's self-deportations happening. The system, and he's also putting strictures and controls on legal migration. in order to alleviate some of the cultural and social and economic pressure that came out of mass migration into the United States. Trump is keeping his word on immigration. And people will fight about whether he's doing enough. That's irrelevant. Trump is, in the main, following the channel that he set out. He said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to build the wall, which is really shorthand for control immigration. And then he's following through on that promise. Trump on law and order. I think we've seen a remarkable fall in the murder rate in major American cities. And there's a number of reasons why that's happening. Some of it is because of the post-COVID disruption is finally calming down some, but a lot of it turns on prosecutors being willing to enforce the law. Trump is setting that precedent. He's talked about enforcing the law. He's made law and order a key campaign issue. It's coming true, right? Voters like it when you have a candidate who comes into office, says they're going to do something, and then does it. I think on the economy, Trump is also, I think, more or less kept in line with his campaign promise to, have an American golden age. Markets are at all-time highs. And it's true, while a lot of Americans don't own stocks, there are many who do, and they're better off for having a stronger market, right? There's a lot of capital investment going on right now. And you can argue again about whether that's malinvestment or whether or not you're going to see a bust and because of inflationary pressure. And those are real dangers. My point is, a lot of the damage that was done during the Biden years is finally calming down. And of course, there are still very real problems. And I think Americans feel rightly that things are not all is not well in the economy. But the point is, things are better than they were. And that too is going to benefit Trump. And again, we look at gas prices and oil prices right now because of the Iran war. They are coming down at present. I still think there's some real risks in the market. I don't claim to have a crystal ball. I don't have financial advice for you if you're looking for me to stock pick for you. What I want to say, though, is that if Trump goes through with a deal, and I think it's increasingly likely that he will, the market is pricing that in, I think if he does that, you see a fall in gas prices down to more manageable, more normal levels. So I think right now, my analysis is because Trump has kept his promises on his key issues, immigration and law enforcement, and to a lesser extent on the economy, I think you're going to see Republicans do well in the fall. I think Republicans will do well because of the one big beautiful bill. And even though it added a ton of debt to the it's a major deficit spending bill. Even so, Trump got the immigration enforcement funding that he wanted, and there were also good things in that bill for Republicans. There was, relaxing of firearms laws in some key ways. You see, again, the sheer fact that Trump got that win is crucially important. Crucially important. And so, again, to go back to the core issue of the filibuster, of course Trump is right to want the filibuster gone. The more of his agenda he can get passed, the better it is for him. And by the way, and this was a striking thing too in Thomas Massey's loss. Massey was an opponent of getting rid of the filibuster, which I consider to be one of the least libertarian things that guy ostensibly believes. The main reason that Massey lost was because he did not vote for the one big beautiful bill. He did not vote to pass through Trump's agenda, even though it was crucial for Trump himself and for the promises he made to voters. So Massey refused to vote for it because of deficit spending. But the problem is the reason you have these giant omnibus spending bills is because of the Byrd rule in the Senate, which pushes for these bills. They can only go through for a reconciliation vote. Reconciliation rules is where you can get an actual majority to vote on these bills, but it has to be in regards to the budget. So you functionally have this system where they pile all the spending together. It's toxic for everyone, basically. But it's a hostage situation. You have to do it, or you end up in a situation where there's no budget at all. There's no, you're just essentially just continuing resolution after continuing resolution. So I think if you're a libertarian who wants less government spending, or you want to undo government programs, the best thing you can have is simple majority rule, because that's the only way you're going to get individual pieces of legislation through that can instantiate cuts, that can put in place, you can just take out one administrative agency at a time. So in a way, fighting against the filibuster, it's conservative, we want fewer laws, we want Congress doing less. The problem is Congress does very little right now. Members of Congress are mostly just influencers. That's what Thomas Massey became in the last few years of his time in Congress. He's essentially a podcaster, right? And that's not what you should be doing when you're in Congress. You should not, if you're a member of Congress, you should not aim to be me. You should aim to be a legislator. You should aim to pass laws. You should aim to get real concrete victories for your constituents. The world does not need members of Congress as opinion makers. It needs them to act as legislators. If you're an opinion maker, in some way, you've already lost, right? You're a tier below what you should be. And I say that as someone who is an influencer, right? Micro niche internet celebrity is lower on the totem pole than legislator, political figure who can make real changes. That's real concrete political power. The best that someone like me can do is to shape opinion in such a way that it drives policy. I'm upstream of the crucially important part of the process, but it's a lonely and often the marginal value is lower, right? It's just harder to have influence when you're here as opposed to there, inside of the legislature, inside of these bodies, making real changes. Donald Trump is a more important figure than any podcaster or television host in America. He's bigger than Tucker Carlson, right? The reason for that is Trump is actually in power. He can make real choices. And what the filibuster allows is for members of Congress not to make real choices. It allows the senators in particular to hide behind the skirts of procedure to explain why it is that they're not doing their job and delivering for voters. And that's convenient to them because they want to avoid the moment of sovereign decision. When you cast that ballot, yes or no, on a piece of legislation, that is a true moment of decision. You can't hide behind any more shields. You tie yourself to a policy. There's no wheeling and dealing behind closed doors. You can't claim that you were held hostage. If it's a simple majority vote on something like the SAVE Act or repealing Obamacare, and you vote no, you have to live with that choice. And a lot of these GOP members of the Senate are not in any respect are they conservative. They do not care about the will of their constituents. They are there to make money, to conduct insider trading, to capitalize on their influence within government bureaucracies. They are not there to make life better for their constituents. And you can tell because they don't fight to remove the procedures in the way of them being able to pass meaningful legislation. And the filibuster itself is a kind of ridiculous procedural norm. The idea that we can't end debate, that you have to have endless talking, is itself an absurdity. A legislative body needs to vote. Debate has to be limited. You can't just talk indefinitely. That's ridiculous. But moreover, they don't even talk. The filibuster has gotten to the point where you don't even stand on the floor of the Senate reading out a speech. It's just a roll call votes, endless roll call votes on C-SPAN. Absurd. It's a system in which the minority is able to prevent the majority from governing and legislating, from imposing its will through the system. And I think there's a lot of questions about Congress's power. I think Congress does way too much. There's so much the federal government is doing that it shouldn't do. And we are going to get to the point at which we have to have a reckoning with the whole system, with the national debt, with the welfare state, with the warfare state, with these administrative agencies, with the millions of bureaucrats, with the failing institutions that litter our federal bureaucracy. I'm looking at you, the post office. If you look at, we have to have a reckoning, and you can do this through an extra legal process or a legal process. And I prefer right now to try the legal process. If you're get to the point where you're looking at extra legal options to curtail what Congress is doing and the rot that's set in the system, you've already lost in some very key way. You're in a moment where things are now really unstable. It would be better to avoid that. The best thing would be for the American people to be able to make policy through their elected representatives. That would be best. That when the majority gets in, the majority is able to pass the laws that it wants. That's better than a system in which you can't have change at all, where you have essentially locked in place the administrative framework that the left enjoys today. So that's the key argument, I think, for opposing the filibuster and pushing members of Congress to do their job. I like what Trump is doing. I like the fact that he's primarying. He's endorsing opponents to Republicans who refuse to get on board with the program, right? Taking out the Indiana state senators who refused to vote for redistricting. That would get rid of Democrat seats. The same thing should be done to the South Carolina State Senate, which again voted against getting rid of South Carolina's sole democratically held congressional seat. It's an illegal, racist, majority-minority district that should be abolished. There is no reason why Democrats in a state like South Carolina deserve to have a congressional seat. That's absurd. There are no Republicans in New England. Why should there be any Democrats in the Deep South? These are states that have overwhelmingly gone for Trump. Why should they deserve congressional representation? Republicans need to be focused on winning. Focus on winning. Focus on getting the legislative wins that you said you would deliver to your constituents. And if you're not campaigning on achievement and winning and doing what you said you would, then what are you doing, right? What are you doing? What is the purpose of your role in Congress if you don't have anything to show for it? Again, this is a big part of the reason I think Thomas Massie deserved to lose his congressional race. He could not point to meaningful accomplishments for his constituents. In his last term, he's focused on Epstein files nonsense. That's like the one thing he's known for is functionally accusing the President of the United States, the head of his party, Donald Trump, of being an associate of pedophiles. By referring to the Epstein class and including Republicans and President Trump in that phraseology, what he's saying there is that the Republican Party is made up of pedophiles and pedophile defenders. And I think that implication, that insinuation, that outright claim is itself disgusting. It's wrong. How can you possibly have a political career in a party where you are making those kinds of allegations against your fellows? It's absurd. It's ridiculous. Massie is an object lesson in what it means to lose yourself in your own ego, to lose yourself in terms of seeing things for what they are. There is a reality where you need to deliver for your constituents. You need to deliver real wins. And if all you can do is say no, even when your party is in power, even when it's possible, potentially possible, for you to extract concessions, to build a political coalition, to make real change in the future, and you don't do it, I think that speaks very poorly of your skills as a politician. Rand Paul has the same problem. Same problem. That is a guy who, again, can't get clear. I think it's good to have members of Congress who are opposed to COVID lockdowns, who are opposed to foreign wars, who are opposed to deficit spending, who want to slash the budget, get rid of fraud, get rid of abuse, get rid of these agencies. Good, but they need to win, right? And you're not going to do any of that by allying yourself with Ro Khanna and other Democrats. You don't get it by simply saying no all the time. You have to build a political coalition. There's a lot of attacks on libertarians in the wake of Massie's loss. And I think some of that is deserved. Libertarian political instincts in America have often been extremely uneven, to say the least. And a lot of elements of the mainstream libertarian position, the sort of phraseology, I want gay couples to defend their weed farms with legal machine guns. That program has not done well in American life for obvious reasons, or it's certainly a kind of childish position that often ignores, and it does ignore, key problems socially and politically that we have right now. But on the other hand, many of these libertarians could make themselves useful by pointing to the extent to which the modern state is itself a left-wing entity that is opposed to the good of the American people and advocating for meaningful reductions in spending that would accrue to the American people as lower tax burdens. That is a place where libertarians can absolutely make a difference by going after these federal agencies. Libertarians who attack the central bank, the Federal Reserve, who attack inflationary policies. There is a place for all of that on the right. And what you see is, I think it's less that libertarian ideology, especially when it focuses on economics and federal power, that there are real gains that can be made in that area. But what happens is you have these figures who emphasize grandstanding over delivering real results and gaining real political victories. So whereas a functioning movement would work within the right more broadly, would work with Trump, would work with the Republican Party to gain the kinds of advancements that are accessible, the low-hanging fruit. What are some things that can be capitalized on now, right? What kind of trade-offs need to be made in order to accomplish that political goal in the long run? And again, to go back to the core of this discussion, the filibuster is the heart of that problem. So if you're a libertarian, or you lean that way, or you want the liberty movement or the freedom movement or lower deficits, what you want is for bare majorities to get in from the right and be able to legislate. For instance, if we'd gotten rid of the filibuster, and you can do an up and down vote in the Senate, in the House, it is plausible. It is, in fact, likely that you could bring a bill to the floor to abolish, let's say, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You could get rid of the Department of Education. You could make deep, lasting cuts. You could, and I've said this before many times, cutting funding and subsidies for American universities should be a higher priority for conservatives in Congress than almost any other kind of grandstanding that they're doing. It is very important to deny the left institutional control of these gatekeeping, of these gateways into professional and personal success. The fact that a college degree is so valuable in American life today grants a ton of power to fundamentally left-wing institutions. There is no reason to subsidize that system. And it is the sort of thing that the Republican Party could do in order to help Trump deliver on his agenda and really solidify their gains for a generation. Take away left-wing Democratic control over the universities, and you've removed a core part of their ability to project power socially, economically, and politically. That is thinking concretely. And by the way, it'd be very popular. It's simply, you could essentially work out a deal where you could forgive or at least make bankruptable student loans while at the same time getting rid of the system as such. That right there would be a huge victory. It's the sort of thing that a political party with sharp instincts, with an eye on the domestic political situation, can use in order to advance itself. So again, Trump ran on immigration, he ran on crime, he ran on the economy. There's easy to deliver on those goals. Trump is delivering right now simply using executive power. But imagine if Congress could back up what he's doing by making these a key part of the law of the country. And by the way, I think if they would do that, you would just see win after win after win in the future. I mean, just think about immigration policy, for instance. Trump has done a lot on illegal immigration, especially border control. But imagine if Congress were to come in and simply repeal Hart-Celler. You could remove this system in which Democrats are able to denaturalize foreigners who fundamentally align themselves with the radical left. If you look at immigrant voting patterns, it overwhelmingly favors the Democratic Party. There is no reason Republicans should grant that kind of political subsidy to their opponents. Why should Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or any of these other Democratic politicians get the boost that comes to them as a byproduct of naturalizing large swaths of immigrants from the non-Western world? It doesn't make sense. The Democratic Party is utilizing state power in order to replace the people, in order to entrench their own political system, their ideological system. It is fundamentally left-wing. It is a system that is totalitarian. COVID showed that. It is a system that does not respect property rights. It does not respect the family. It does not respect marriage. It is a system that is coercive. It takes from those who are successful to redistribute it to the least among us. The system is fundamentally socialistic. It is interventionist. Democrats, liberals, leftists, all in favor of war. When it's Libya, when it's Syria, when it's Ukraine, they're all in favor of going abroad in search of monsters to destroy, when it's they who get to decide what monsters get to be hunted down. And so the point I want to make over and over and over here to anyone who might be listening, if you're a member of Congress, if you're a staff member, if you're someone who knows a member of Congress, what I want to leave you here with today is this: call for the elimination of the filibuster. Reach out to a member of Congress, your member of Congress. Reach out to your senator, call for the removal of the filibuster, call for the passage of the SAVE Act. The lesson that the Republican Party needs to learn from the defeat of John Cornyn is that this kind of behavior, this unwillingness to pass the president's agenda, cannot continue. It is not a viable strategy for the future. That's the lesson we need to teach to our elected officials. And when we do that, I think you're going to see much better circumstances for the country. That is my hope and prayer. Again, thank you so much for joining me here today. You can follow me on Twitter or X at @JLippincott. You can follow my Substack, Regime Critic. This show, Lippincott Talk, can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Substack. I post in all of those places. I want to encourage you to keep listening. I want to encourage you to engage. I want to encourage you to keep thinking and use your mind. God bless. I'll see you next time. Thank you.